Thank you everyone for being here. I appreciate it so much. Thank you so much for coming out. As he mentioned, my name is Dale Spoonmore, and my wife and I started here. You can see this is our backyard. That's where we started 4 years ago now. We knew nothing about gardening, but we knew we wanted to try it. And kind of just give a little backstory, kind of what led to this. I've dealt with anxiety and depression throughout my entire life, and gardening was the first thing. The idea of growing food was the first thing that actually helped me with that. And so much so that you can see that it basically took over our lives. And that's kind of what led to the idea that, once we learned how to grow food, we wanted to make it really easy for other people to do the same thing. And I've grown up on computers my entire life. I've worked at a software company since the day I pretty much walked out of high school. And from the beginning, we felt like we could make an app that could make this whole thing easy, right? We had spreadsheets in the beginning. We were doing all of that. We had Evernote files. We had all sorts of systems. And we wanted to make an app to make it easy, and that's what this app does. So this app walks you through how to grow over 80 different foods. And just to kind of start off from, we started growing food with the idea that we wanted to grow food to help with anxiety and with depression. So my wife, Carrie, is a nurse, and she worked with nutritionists and other experts to help identify what plants go with each health issue that you would want to grow for. And that's where she came up with this feature, this Grow for Health, where you can go through and choose from 26 different health conditions. And once you choose on one, we show you the plants that help with that. So right off the bat, when you're starting out, it's overwhelming. There's this huge universe of plants. Where do you start with? What do I grow first? And we try and make that simple by showing you the things that will help you with whatever you're growing. So with that idea in mind, what I want to do today is go through and kind of start talking about how you can start growing food. So if you've never grown food before, you're starting out, where do you start, right? Because that's where we were, and I want to try to put myself back there and go through that process. So we actually have a feature in the app that we have built that is for this exact question, and it's the Getting Started tab here. And when you tap on it, we show you the steps that you need to take in order to start a garden. So the first one, obviously, is to choose the right location. This is one of the most important steps, obviously, if you're going to build a permanent garden in the ground. So this kind of ties right into step two. So I'm going to talk about them hand in hand. And step two is what do you put the garden in once you choose where to put it. So if you're going to grow in the ground, you've really got to pay attention to where it's going to be and how much sun it gets is the biggest thing. Our first year, I put our raised beds on the side of a fence that was shaded and all the way until March, because I built them in April. I didn't realize that, I didn't pay attention to the sun enough when I was younger, unfortunately. So that was a hard lesson to learn, because then I had to try and build them up off the ground. And then so you really want to evaluate where is the sun going to be all throughout the year. And just because it gets shade does not mean it's a bad thing. Some plants need some shade. You're gonna like having that space. But you just got to analyze where all your spaces are in your yard and what locations you can use. So, and you want to think again about how that's going to change throughout the year. There are devices you can buy to help with this, like a sunlight calculator measurement tool, things like that. I've never really found value in that. I need to get outside more often anyway, so I just go outside and every hour I go outside and take a picture of a spot. So then I do that. For the first year I did that. Every month I would go take a picture of a spot, and I would kind of see, where the sun was moving, and I could go back and reference it. So you don't have to go that extreme. I'm OCD, but you'll kind of get the hang of it. The second thing to consider is, what are you going to do with all this Bermuda grass that's a nightmare and that's trying to get into your garden and take over all that space? And the first year, I spent most of my time fighting it, and it made me kind of like gardening, but also kind of hate gardening. And the second year, I wanted to get rid of that problem altogether. So that's really when we started learning about methods like the Back to Eden gardening method, where you can cover the entire yard with cardboard and then cover that with a foot of wood chips. And then as those wood chips break down, and as the cardboard breaks down, the worms come up and eat it, and now that soil turns into really good soil. So that's a gardening method we started to use. But in the meantime, I didn't want to wait a year for all this process to happen. I wanted to start growing now. So we built raised beds that were kind of planted all along, where those wood chips are. And this is a great way to go. If I were starting over again today, I don't know if I would do this, because I've had a lot of really good success with these smart pots. And that kind of leads into another idea of container gardening. And I started container gardening first with the plastic containers, and those were terrible in the summer because they would get so hot. that they just would not do well. And then I found these, and these are called smart pots. And I got a big one first, and I started with one of these. And I actually started with two of these. I bought one that I buried in the ground, and then one that I put on top of the ground, because I was convinced that this black plastic in Oklahoma summer would not do well. And I was proven wrong, because the one that was up above ground did way better than the one that was buried. And that was when I really started to take notice of these. And I had friends, I had professor friends at OSU that talk about these, they rave about them, and that really helped open my eyes to these. So I started using these 2 or 3 years ago now. The years all run together, but I've been using them for a couple years now. I've really been impressed, and if I were to start over again, I would probably go this route, because I like the portability of it. If I move, I can just take them with me. You know, these raised beds, if I sell this house and someone doesn't want a garden, I've got to figure out what to do with everything I've built. You know, this is more of a portable option. I also like, this is what I started with, were these giant ones. They're nice, but I've really started to appreciate the value in having these smaller ones. So what I'll do is I'll have several of these smaller ones, and then I will put these inside of a kiddie pot, like a kiddie pool, like a swimming pool, and then I'll put that with an inch or two of water in the bottom. And in the summer I'll do this, and it'll be sub-irrigated, and then that'll really help with water loss when it's really hot. So I'll have like 3 or 4 or 5 of these inside that kiddie pool. And then you don't want to put too much water in there. You could cause root rot issues. There are some downsides to doing that. You don't want to do it in the spring and the fall, but in the summer, it's a great strategy. So that's a couple different ways you can grow. I would not grow with standard containers unless it's somewhere that gets some shade or something. It just gets so hot. And the nice thing about these smart pots is that they're able to breathe through the sides. So this material allows air in through the side, so when roots hit the side, they don't start circling like they do in those containers. They form these tiny little capillaries that suck in oxygen. So it's like the plant is supercharged, and it's able to really grow faster than they are in other plants. I've seen it side by side. I put plants in a regular raised bed, in a smart pot, and a buried smart pot, and I see the results right there. So I've started to use more and more of these in our yard, especially it's nice to have them portable, so if we're gonna have a big hailstorm, if I've got a broccoli that's really doing well, I can move it, you know, like things like that. I really like using these. So that kind of covers the idea of location and what do you grow in. But now that kind of leads us into the idea of what do you put in that, or what soil do you use, right? Because that's really the biggest factor for growing food successfully, is what soil is in there. So back to the Getting Started tab, we have a step that is dedicated to this. So the soil mix tab shows you a soil mix that we actually make ourselves. Now you can go out and buy soil mix. You're going to spend a lot of money buying potting mix. It's expensive. We did that for 1 or 2 bags, and pretty quickly started Googling how to make this ourselves. And this is the recipe that's in Square Foot Gardening, which is a method I'll get into here in a minute and cover. But it's really simple. You take vermiculite. You can use perlite instead. It's a little bit cheaper. But basically, just it's a coarse rock that's blown up. And then it makes like a popcorn type substance. The little white flakes you see in potting, that's what this is. And it absorbs moisture really well, and then it helps with water retention. Peat moss helps with, again, consistency and water retention. It doesn't provide any food for the plants. And that's why compost is so important. So compost is where I'm gonna spend some time talking about. The first year, we made as much compost as we could, but we couldn't make enough to get started. So I started buying compost from everywhere I could. And I did it without really taking a lot of time to consider where the compost was coming from, and that was a huge mistake, because we ended up killing half of our tomatoes from compost that was tainted with herbicide, because it was made from horses that were eating from fields that were sprayed with herbicide. And the problem with the modern day herbicides is they last for up to 3 to 5 years in the soil. Once they come out of the horse, and it's a nightmare. So I stopped bringing in compost that I didn't know where it came from, and I started exclusively buying compost from places I could trust. So I've done testing on Minnick Materials, I've done testing on Markham's Nursery on their compost. I've bought both of theirs. I've had good results with it. I actually have a test on our YouTube channel where I show how you can test compost. The short version of that is you take peas and you plant them in a container with the compost, and then in containers without the compost, and you see how well they grow. And after 3 weeks, if they have issues, then something's wrong. You do peas because they're very sensitive, so it's a plant that you can really tell differences. Unfortunately, that takes 21 days. So I know a lot of us, when we're starting out, we buy the compost, we don't have the patience to wait 21 days. So if you don't, you could end up with problems. But like I said, those places that I mentioned earlier, they've been making compost the same way for a long time, and they haven't changed the process. So I've been pretty comfortable with them. And I'm not getting paid by them or anything like that. It's nothing like that at all. Compost you can also get from municipal places, like Norman has compost you can get. I got it a lot the first year, but the thing that scares me about getting compost from places like that is they make it from material that's brought in from everywhere. So golf courses and homeowners and anyone can bring material there, and that's what they use to make the compost. So who knows what is going into that? And my whole tomato thing just scared me away from that. So I'm shy on that. So I'd rather pay some more to know I'm getting high quality compost and not take a gamble that all my work is for nothing. So I typically avoid that. But if I were growing, if I were growing corn, or if I wanted compost for a grass area or to fill in a space, then I would totally use that. Just not for stuff I'm growing that I'm going to eat that I care about. So that's the way I feel about that kind of like free or cheap compost options. Let's talk about, so why compost is so important. Another strategy with compost is whenever I buy compost, I try and get as many sources of compost as I can. So if I'm buying from Minnick, they have three types, I'll buy all three. And then I also buy some from Markham's, and I mix that all together. And the reason for that is because this is the food for your plants, and you want them to have a balanced diet, just like you would have a balanced diet. You don't want to eat chicken for every single meal. Like you need to eat different things. Your plants do as well. So when you have compost that comes from different places, they made it different ways. It came from different byproducts, so you get different nutrients in it. It's more well-rounded, and you also have a less chance of there being an issue from it. So that's my strategy with compost. It's a little more work, but it's definitely worth it. So you mix all those together, put them in the container. A quick tip for how to mix them together quickly. I have a YouTube video that shows this, but those compost tumblers that you always see that like spin, and stuff, they're terrible for compost, but they're great for mixing soil. So people buy them for compost, and then like 6 months later, they get rid of them, and they're on the side of the road, or they're on Craigslist for 20 bucks. And then you can go buy them and use them to make soil. And they last about 2 years doing that before you wear them out, then you just repeat. So that's my process on making the soil quickly. I tried the tarp method and all that kind of stuff, and it was just took a lot of time. And as soon as we found that method, we were able to really scale up and build a lot faster than we were before by mixing the soil. Because that's a tenuous job, because you've got to mix it all in pretty good equal proportions, and you got to keep it wet. And it sounds easy, but it will really tire you out. And that tumbler really, really helps out with that. So that's a little tip for it. Okay, so once you know where you're going to plant and you know what you want to plant, what you're going to plant it in. So now let's talk about how to actually start planting. So let's go back over to the Growing Guides tab, and I want to go through and start just by planning out from now until I run out of time and they pull me off stage. Everything you can, like what we're planting from here on out and what we're doing. I'm just going to talk through that, okay? So starting now, and I'm going to backdate a little bit so that you kind of know where my garden is coming into. So right now I have plants in my garden that I planted last fall. I have spinach and kale that I planted in October and November. It survived all winter without protection, and now it is really starting to come alive. Now this weekend probably gave it a punch. It's going to, but it's going to come back just fine. Kale's from Russia. It laughs at this cold. It's fine. So those do really, really well. We're going to plant more kale seeds and more spinach seeds because that kale that we planted in the fall, now that it's been through a winter, whenever the heat comes, it doesn't care if it dies as much. It's ready to go, right? But the spinach that I start now has not been through a winter yet, so it's going to be more. It's going to fight harder against going to seed in the summer. So I like to have a mix of both. That way I have greens deeper into the summer. So I've got a mix of both of those going. So let's go and show spinach and talk about how you would plant it now, because spinach and kale are very similar. I'm going to show spinach. Let's scroll down and tap on spinach. So once you tap on a plant, we give you a description at the very top, which kind of gives you our summary of why we care about that. And this description is changing every update. We're kind of OCD about these. We're always changing them. But this is straight from Carrie and I. This is why we care about this plant. And then below that, it's planting dates. So we use your nearest weather station. We have a database of 5,000 weather stations that we store in the app. And then we use that to calculate. We have the past 100 years worth of weather data for each one of those weather stations. And we calculate your planting date based on your location. So that's what we show here. And you can go in and actually adjust this. So these dates are super safe. If you want to play it risky, you can tap the settings button, and then you can go in here and you can actually change how risky you want to play things. By default, we make it very safe. Oklahoma is insane with our weather, so I recommend going safe because it may be great in March, and then we get that snowstorm in April that just wipes out everyone's tomatoes. So as you scroll down, we give you more information about how to grow it. So we show you the season that it is. I should show over here. We show you the number per square. So square foot gardening is a concept that we started with. That is pretty simple. The basic idea is you take a garden and you separate it into 1 square foot plots. And this is a tool that is called the seeding square that I really like, that makes this process really easy. So each plant has a number for how many seeds can be planted per square. So carrots are 16, which is each red one. So when you plant carrots, you just go and put a carrot in every red square when you put that down. And then spinach is 9, I believe, so that's yellow. Basil is 4, so each one has its own. So it makes it really simple. A really cool thing about this too is we taught our 2-year-old how to count and her colors on this device as well. It was really cool for that. But square foot gardening makes it really simple to do a couple things that I want to go ahead and introduce now. One of them is companion planting. Because as you're planting, you do not want to plant all of one thing in a bed. The main reason for that is because the pests that are looking for that plant have a really easy time finding it if the whole thing is that one plant. Whereas if you have a raised bed that you have multiple things in, then it's harder for the pests to find what they're looking for. Especially if you mix up things that are really fragrant in that bed, like oregano and rosemary and things like that, because the way that pests find what they're looking for is through their sense of smell. So if a tomato hornworm is flying around and it sees a whole bed of tomatoes, it's really easy for it to find it because it's a really strong scent coming from there. Whereas if you have oregano and basil and all this other stuff around it, it's harder for it to find it because it's just surrounded by scents that overpower it. So anyway, that's square foot gardening. That's basically one of the key reasons why you want to do it is companion planting, but also crop rotation. So not planting the same thing in the same place every time, moving things around is super important because that's how diseases build up in the soil, because diseases take a couple years to get going, right? So if you just move things around, you're always ahead of the game. But if you have tomatoes in the same place every year, the diseases will really build up there, and that's why you see these issues crop up. So if you do those two things, you avoid most of the issues that typically cause people problems with gardening and what lead them to quit. So that's one. There's just a couple of reasons why I like square foot gardening. I also come from a computer science background, and so like this whole system, this engineering system, I really liked, and it made it easy for me to kind of memorize it in the beginning. So I really like that aspect of it. So that's what this whole square foot gardening thing is here. So time to harvest. This is, it's how many days it takes to harvest from when it sprouts. So this varies wildly between varieties, and this is where I want to show the varieties tab. So we have a partnership now with Burpee, which is the largest seed company in the country, and we pulled in all 1,500 varieties from their database and their website. So you can pull them in here and you can go through and see, all the different spinach seeds they have available, and they all have their own days of maturity. So see, some of these are like 40, 35, 70, like they're all different. So this is where varieties really have, and varieties have their own differences in taste and in how well they do in heat versus cold. There's a lot of different things that are at play when you're choosing varieties. And this has traditionally been something that is kind of an overwhelming decision that when I first started gardening, it made me want to cry a little bit because I saw all these varieties and I'm like, how do I try them all? My OCD just was not happy with it. And that's one of the reasons why we designed this new feature that we just released that lets you go into this varieties list. So tomatoes is one thing that there's a ton of tomatoes out there. And trying to choose what tomato am I going to grow is a very daunting decision that often led to me surfing websites for hours but not actually buying anything. So what we've built is now you can choose the type. So if I choose that I want to grow, or I can choose this. Now I see all the different types of tomatoes that Burpee has in their database. So if I choose one, I'm going to choose slicer, for example. Now it shows the list of the slicers they have, and I can tap on it. I can go to Burpee's website and then buy it from there. So this is a way that we're hoping to make seed buying really simple. We want to continue to innovate on this by showing you the varieties that are best for your location. That's something we want to do soon so that you can go in here and see these are the ones that do well for where I live. So we can start you off on the right foot. We also show you the ones that are most popular on Burpee. So sometimes when I'm starting out and I'm not really sure which one I want to go with, I'll kind of scroll through the list and look for one that is, this one doesn't have that update, darn. But if you downloaded the app on your phone, you'll see most popular below it, and you'll be able to see which ones have. And speaking of which, to find the app, if you search for gardening in the App Store, you'll be able to find it that way. That's one of the top results for that. Or if you go to seedtospoon.net, we have links on there, and you can download it directly from there. It's on iOS, on Android, and we also have a web version of the app that works on any computer. So literally from any computer, you can go to app.seedtospoon.net, and that'll pull up the app, and that'll let it work on like Kindle Fires and things like that that don't have the Google Store. Okay, so let's get back into growing. So we talked about spinach. Let's talk a little more about spinach and really some of these other concepts more than just spinach, but watering and sun requirements, because these are two important things. So I mentioned location earlier, and the reason why I mentioned that is because some plants like to be in the sun all the time. Some plants don't like to be in the sun all the time, especially in Oklahoma once it gets hot. So spinach is one of those plants that cannot tolerate heat. So what I do with spinach is I plant half of it out in full sun so that in the spring it gets that full sun when it likes it. But the other half I plant so that it's shaded in the afternoon, so that then in the summer I have some spinach that is not getting as hot as the other stuff is, and it goes later into the year. So again, this is how you have shade and sun. You use them both to your advantage, and you kind of just decide what you need and then use that to guide what you plant. Watering. Right now we show you a description to tell you how often you should water. From the time we released this app, I did not feel like this was not good enough, and that's why we started working on a version that would send you push notifications telling you when to water based on how much has rained, because that was kind of the vision of what we wanted. And we started working on that, and that is going to be a part of what we're starting to roll out throughout this year. So we have this new version coming of our app. It's going to be a pro version. That's the My Garden version. And we actually have the developers here today. Justin and Patrick are here, right there. And these guys don't ever get any credit, but they work so hard building this stuff. And they have built it so that you can go in, you can log when you've planted, and then we use that to help guide along and give you push notifications telling you when to water, telling you when the harvesting window opens. It guides your hand through the entire process. We're very excited about this. We feel like it's going to make it to where no one has an excuse to not grow food. We feel like we have made it completely simple, where all you have to do is just do what the app tells you, and hopefully you will have food. So be looking for that coming out. We're going to have the early versions of it rolling out in March, and then we're going to continue to add new things. We have some really exciting ideas for being able to do things like take a picture of a pest and it'll tell you what it is. Just a lot of really cool stuff. I mean, I got some of the best software developers I know just to start building stuff, and we all just, we're having a lot of fun. So be looking for that stuff coming out throughout the spring. But for now, we tell you the information. So we give you all the information in this app. This version of the app we have out now gives you all the information you need to grow food. It's just up to you to go look it up and do everything. So the next version of My Garden will take that away. So it'll tell you what to do and when to do it and make it really simple. So let's talk now about how to know how that plant likes to be planted. Because every plant is a little bit different. Some plants you can start from seed, or you can start inside and then transplant them, or you can buy them at a nursery and transplant. Some things you cannot transplant ever. So that's what this feature is for. It tells you what can be started by seed and what needs to be transplanted. A way to remember things that can definitely never be transplanted is this. Anything that grows a root, like a carrot or a beet or anything like that, cannot be transplanted. And anything that's like a bean or a pea cannot be transplanted. That's the way I remember. Everything else, for the most part, is pretty much, I mean, I might be missing a few things here and there, but that's basically the way that I remember that kind of stuff. But this is how you can see it there. We also show you the seed depth, how far down you put the seed, how many days it takes to sprout, all that kind of stuff, how tall it's going to be when it's full grown. And then what family it's in. That's important because you don't want to put members of the same family back to back in a square, like season after season, because that's what causes, again, buildup of pests and diseases, because plants and diseases attack plants within the same family generally. So that's why we list that there. And again, these are the kind of things that we really are excited about being able to innovate by letting you, do things like draw out and map your garden, and we help you do that kind of stuff. So that's the kind of stuff we're working towards that we're really excited about. Below that, we show you, so once you've grown it, the next step is how to harvest, how to cook with it, and how to save seeds. So we show you all of that here. Again, this is straight from us. This is our language. And we tried to make it as clear as we can about how we're actually using this in our kitchen. So Carrie is OCD about trying every recipe she can find. Because of that, we have 27 recipes for zucchini in the app. because we got tired of eating zucchini and we had to find ways to make it taste good. So she is adding a new blog post every single day to our website, and those pull into here as well. Let me show that. So if you actually go to the More tab on a vegetable, we pull in all of the videos and blog posts that are on our website for that vegetable. So this app is updated in real time every single day, coming straight from our backyard and our kitchen with the stuff that we're trying. And we both are very similar in that we love trying all these different recipes, and oftentimes our date nights are just trying recipes and making videos about them. We're geeks in that way. So let me go back over here and show. So the Friends tab shows you, so once you've decided that you want to grow spinach, right? We've got it in the ground, we've got it watered, everything's going right. We need to decide what else we want to grow next to it. So that's why we built this Friends tab, to make that decision process easy. So when you come in here, you can see everything that grows well next to spinach. And then from here, you can decide what else to grow. So I know that peas also grow well in the cool season, so I can tap on peas, and then I can see, okay, so this pea is something else I would grow next to spinach. And that's how you can go through and kind of plan out your garden. And let's go ahead and talk about peas for a minute. Let me check the time. Okay, so peas are something else that can be planted early in the year. So it's another cool season crop. A lot of the other cool season crops are, in line with spinach, like their kale and lettuce and some of the leafy greens. And then you also get into things like peas. So peas can tolerate cool weather really well, and you can start planting them in Oklahoma here next month. So peas are great to grow because they help the other plants around them. They're a member of a family that can take nitrogen out of the air and put it down into the soil, which is important because no other plants can do that. So they're able to make their own food, and the plants that come behind them are able to benefit from that by being able to use that food as well. So we grow a lot of peas. Peas like to grow vertically. They like to climb things. So we build our own trellises really simple by taking T-posts and stick them in the ground, and then taking the hardware remesh panels and zip tying them to the T-posts. And that's typically what we use for panels. Those hardware remesh panels are about $8 at Home Depot. So it's really cheap. The T-posts I get free all the time because people just have them on the side of the curb, or a big trash day, or I see them everywhere. I'm like a T-post hawk. I'm always looking for them. So I've got a lot of those that I just kind of keep on hand for stuff like this. And that's what I do for most of my trellises. I will also take cattle panels, the 14-foot ones from Tractor Supply, and I'll bend them over to make them like an arch, and then those are really nice to grow some of the things that grow longer, like pole beans and some of the squashes that get heavier. A lot of those things I like to grow on that. So that's typically how I grow a lot of these trellising things. As far as how to grow peas, I'm not going to go into a lot of the detail on a lot of these because a lot of the information is within the app. I really want to cover kind of at a high level what the strategy is, and then you can go in and get the details for that plant in here. So with that in mind, let's jump back and look at what else we can grow in the cool season. So we have this filter bar down at the very bottom, this additional filter options. And when you tap on it, you can see, right now you can choose can be planted now. Unfortunately, there's nothing that's technically open right now. Everything is coming up in a few weeks. That's one of the reasons why Patrick has been working on a feature that is going to send you push notifications to give you a weekly summary of all the plants that are in season to be either started indoors or outdoors. And then whenever you open the app, there's going to be a new filter here to show you those things that are upcoming. So that's going to be coming out in February. We are very close on having that done. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and filter down to cool season and perennial because that's the season that we're coming up on. Perennial just means it's year-round, so we have that in both the cool season and in the warm season crops, so they're included in both. So if I filter down to cool season and perennial, so let's talk about another type of plant that can be planted in the cool season, and that's the carrots and the beets and things like that, the root crops. So they all are started around this time of year as well. And let's go into carrots because carrots really are one of the problem childs of the garden. They're one of the hardest things to start, at least. The thing about carrots is that it can take up to 21 days for the seeds to germinate. You have to keep them moist pretty much that whole time. So that's the challenge, is if you get lazy for a couple days, if you forget, it's really easy to forget about that, and then the seeds dry out. So with carrots, you got to keep them moist, and to do that, we do an automated sprinkler that we use mostly, but as long as you keep them moist, it's no big deal. Also, you need to have loose soil for these root crops, for carrots and for beets. Especially, they like to have loose soil, or they won't really grow large bulbs. One other thing to mention with these is that too much nitrogen can cause them to produce all tops and no bulbs. So if you give them too much Miracle-Gro or something like that, it can cause a problem. They need phosphorus. which you can get from things like bone meal if you need it. But traditionally, Oklahoma soils have plenty of it. Unless you made your own soil mix, you're not going to need to add any. You can get a soil test at the OSU County Extension offices. At each of them, you can get a soil test, and they'll tell you what your soil is deficient in if you want to get into that. If you followed the directions kind of at the beginning where we talked about compost and everything, you should be fine. And the only thing you'll have to add is nitrogen from time to time. And that's, again, something that the My Garden feature is going to make simple, because we'll send you the push notifications telling you when to fertilize and all of that. But the basic thing with nitrogen is it's pretty simple. Most plants need it every 3 to 4 weeks. I give it in the form of fish fertilizer. I just put in water and I add to it. Some plants have a little bit special care you have to take, like tomatoes. You've got to stop giving it nitrogen once it starts producing tomatoes, or it'll stop, like it'll just keep producing green, right? So, and again, all that information is in the app. We tell you about how to handle that. So back to carrots. The planting date for them is coming up soon. Again, you got to make sure you keep them moist. They're 16 per square, so it's nice. You get a lot of carrots out of a small space, which is really nice with square foot gardening. They are full sun in the spring, but you need to have a plan for them to have some shade once it hits the end of May and June. So this is one way that so we started building these things called shade walls, where we would take T-posts, put them in the ground, and then attach shade cloth to either side with just clips or something like that. We put that on the west side of the bed, so that in the afternoon it was shaded. So those are something we use. Initially we put shade cloth on those, but then we started realizing that we were wasting vertical space that could be used to grow food. So we started growing beans up those walls instead. So we switched the shade cloth over to those hardware mesh, and now we have typically beans or cucumbers on the west side of a lot of our beds, so that we can have our root crops shaded then in the afternoon whenever it gets hot in the summer. And then as you grow, you'll start to kind of see your problem areas of the yard of what gets too much sun and what needs more and all of that. Okay, so we're at 1:30. So let's jump back in to look at what else you can grow in the spring. So broccoli and cabbage are similar to kale, but they're in the same family. But obviously people think of them differently, and I wanted to talk about them differently. And really my view on broccoli and cabbage has evolved since before I started growing food. So when I first started growing food, I thought about broccoli as this big head that you grew that you kind of bought in the store, and that's how I thought about broccoli. But that's changed. Now I think about it more as broccoli, for one, the leaves taste incredible and they're incredibly nutritious. You don't have to wait for that large head to form. But also there's a lot of varieties of broccoli that mostly form side shoots that shoot out. So they don't form like a large head, they form a bunch of tiny side shoots, and you get way more broccoli. It starts forming those quicker, so like 45 to 60 days, as opposed to waiting, 45 maybe, I think it's more like 60, but as opposed to waiting that 90 to 110 for a full broccoli head to form, which you've got to fight off pests the whole time, and hailstorms, and tornadoes, because I'm in more, and all this other stuff. It's I really think about broccoli now as growing the ones that have a lot of the side shoots, and then I also plant a lot of broccoli. So instead of planting the 18 inches per square, or the 18 inches apart, or 1 per square like square foot gardening says, what I will do is I will plant probably a 4 square foot area full of broccoli seeds, and then as they grow, I will watch to see which one's doing best, and I will thin down the ones that aren't. And then we'll eat those, because technically those are microgreens. If you've heard of microgreens, they are, basically the idea is this: a broccoli plant, a full-size broccoli plant has a ton of nutrition inside of it, right? Well, a small broccoli plant has all the nutrition of that seed, plus a couple rounds of photosynthesis. So instead of that nutrition being spread across the entire plant, it's condensed in this small package, and you're able to get, it's kind of like a boost. So the way that we do broccoli now is we just plant a bunch of that. I look to see which broccoli is doing best. I leave that one, the other ones get thinned down, and then we're left with one large broccoli. There's often one of the sprouting varieties. So, and the same with cabbage. I don't grow the large cabbage heads anymore because I'm having to fight off bugs the whole time, and it's just kind of a nightmare. Now I grow more of the Asian cabbages, bok choy, some of the Napa cabbages, things like that. So it's just, I had to adjust the way I thought about some of these foods that I traditionally grown up to think about, but the reality is that these foods we're used to these foods because they are best grown in commercial mass production systems, right? But we're not doing that with our backyard, so we can do things different. So you just got to start thinking about things a little bit different. As far as broccoli and cabbage is concerned though, you can start it outdoors, and I do start a lot of it outdoors, but I also start a lot of it indoors as well, because The growing season on it can be longer, and if you can start it indoors, you can get it a jump start and a head start on the season. So we'll start broccoli and cabbage, and also tomatoes and peppers we start indoors as well, because they have a long growing season. So we start doing that, well, right about now. We should have been doing it this weekend, but we're out here. So when I get home, I will be doing that. We'll be starting our broccoli and cabbage, and we'll be videoing all that, and it'll be going on our YouTube. We live stream a lot of this stuff. We just set up a camera and do what I'm doing right now and just talk about this kind of stuff and show what we're doing in our backyard. Okay, so I think we're getting close on time. I've got a few other things I could probably talk about. Brussels sprouts are very similar to broccoli and cabbage, and that you got to start them indoors. They have a longer growing season, but if you want to grow Brussels sprouts, you really need to start them indoors. Cauliflower is similar as well. Onions can be started in February as well. Onions are really easy to grow. You can start them from seed, but most people just buy the onion sets. So if you go to the nursery, you'll see a little bundle of little baby-looking onions, and you take those, you go plop them in the ground, 1 inch apart, 16 per square, and then those will grow all the way through until May and June. You can start harvesting kind of whenever you want if you want young ones, and we do. We harvest pretty early. We harvest a lot of onions. On a related note, we also grow a lot of chives in our garden because I like to have onion tops, and if you cut the greens off of onions as they're growing, they don't produce bulbs very well. So you want to have chives as well, so you can have the tops. So we do a lot of those in our garden. You can plant those in February-ish, depending on how nice February is to us. But traditionally, we'll be okay at the end of February with that. A lot of the perennial things are great to plant coming up soon too. So things like raspberries and blackberries and all sorts of things like that nature are gonna be good to plant coming up here, starting as we get closer into March. But really, I think we're at that. Yeah, I think we're running out of time too. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and give away some smart pots, and if we have any time when I'm done with that, we can talk about more. So I showed smart pots earlier. Let me pull them up again. So we've got a bunch of them. Sorry. Okay, so Smart Pots is awesome. They're based here in Oklahoma City, and they gave us a bunch of these to give away at our classes, which we've got more coming up too. Right when we're done with this, we've got another one right over there at our space that's all about herbs. But anyway, we've got 2 7-gallon Smart Pots that we are giving away, and these are pretty much universal size. They're good for anything. If you don't have a ticket yet, by the way, okay. So these 7-gallon Smart Pots are great for a universal size. You can fit pretty much anything in here. You could probably put a couple things in here if they're small, so a couple different basils, things like that. They're super portable. I've got a lot of these around the porch. So we've got 2 of these to give away, and the first one goes to ticket number 178. All right. Can you pass that back to me? And the next one goes to 177.
I'll mix them up a little
Did you shake them up at all?
I did.
This happened yesterday too.
I did.
You're making side money. Okay, so next we have 15-gallon Smart Pots, and we have 4 of these. So I had already drawn one. That was 17. Was that the one? So 201. All right. There you go. And the next one is 185. Oh. Okay.
185.
There you go, Jen. Thank you. And next one, 198.
Thank you.
All right.
There you go.
214. All right, and lastly, we have, so this one is that giant one that I showed earlier. So these are awesome. Again, I would definitely make your own soil mix on this one. But these are awesome. You can put literally anything you want in here, a mix of stuff. Not as portable as some of the other ones, but if you have, these are awesome. I love these. These will also go on top of a counter if you have a really sturdy counter outside, like some sort of table, something like that. They'll go on that. All right, so 202. We got a winner? All right, we got a winner. All right, so how much time do I, let's have 5 more minutes so I can talk about a few more vegetables. So does anyone have any specific vegetables that they want to hear about? What do you got? Sweet potatoes, yes, let's talk about potatoes and sweet potatoes because we're kind of leading into potato time. So potatoes you plant St. Patrick's Day, that's how you remember. Potatoes come from Ireland, right? St. Patrick's Day. Onions, Valentine's Day, that's how I remember those two. There's some sort of joke about kissing people with onions. I don't know. That's how I remember. And then, so potatoes are really great to grow in smart pots because traditionally, when you grow potatoes and you go to harvest them, and they're in the ground, you've got to dig for them, and if you use a shovel, you accidentally cut one, and now it's ruined. In these smart pots, you can just dump them out, and then you can go through and harvest. And kids love it. It's like Easter egg hunting for kids. So we just dump them into a little bucket. The kids go through and hunt and see who can get the most, and it's a lot of fun. Sweet potatoes are the exact same way. So sweet potatoes you cannot really plant until later in the year. Those are more of like a May thing. So we have potatoes starting, again, St. Patrick's Day. I'll probably push it a little bit early, starting earlier than that, like the beginning of March. Maybe even trying in February, depending on what the weather's going on. But I'll tell you on Facebook, I tell everyone what I'm doing on there as far as what we're planting. But anyway, with the potatoes, and then we'll start doing sweet potatoes, switching over in May, and then that'll carry through, and then potatoes again in the fall. So that's the way that we grow potatoes. They're really simple to grow. You just basically, every potato has a little eye that you start to see. If you bought the ones from the store, you cut those, each eye makes a new plant. If you've seen The Martian, that was pretty close to how it works. What else can we talk about?
How about staggering for harvest?
What was that?
Staggering.
Staggering, yes, that's a great question. So, yeah, you don't want to plant everything at once. That's important to mention too. Like, you don't want to go out and plant all of your carrots on the same day because then you're getting all your carrots on the same day, which, that's not what you want. So you want to kind of stagger your planting. So what we'll do is we'll go through and kind of every week we're doing a new round of spinach or carrots or whatever it is that we want to have a lot of. We're always staggering those around. I want to jump back and also mention garlic can technically be planted now. You really should be planting it in the fall and letting it overwinter. But if you plant now, we'll probably be okay. You can also do a trick in the spring where you take garlic and put it inside of a bag of soil and put that in the freezer for 3 weeks. And it tricks the garlic into thinking it went through winter. But garlic needs to have some cold in order to really produce big bulbs. So that is something else that can be planted now. Trees, it's going to be a great time to plant all of them coming up soon too. And then really that leads us into herbs. So our class that's right over there starts like at 2 o'clock, and we're talking about 10 herbs, and I didn't talk about any of them yet. So I'm just gonna keep doing what I've been doing, but talking with Bill Ferris over there, who's from Prairie Way Nursery. He's an expert in all things herbs. And we're gonna talk about how to grow and how to cook with 10 different herbs. Yeah, so thank you everyone for coming. I appreciate it. And if you have any questions, we'll be right over there, and love for y'all to join us. Thank you.